You probably heard many times that One Piece is the king of world building, but what does it even mean? And what makes world building great in general? I think that's a great topic to discuss, especially when it comes to One Piece, because I don't think that many people understand what makes up a great fictional world. So today I want to break it down. Oh, and spoilers for all of you non-One Piece fans. Let's go. So, what makes a great world building? I thought about this one real hard and I ended up with 6 criteria that either make or break your fictional world. And today I want to go over them first and then later see how One Piece stacks up in all of those categories. So without further ado, let's start with the first one, and it's geography. Yeah, I wanted to start with the most straightforward one, but it is still important. It is all about how your world looks from way above and how it functions, with the basic rule saying that the more it differs from our world, the better. Why? Well, because you're building your own thing, not copying something else. But there is a catch. The geography of the world has to make sense, even if that sense is fictional. Even if it doesn't make sense according to our science, you have to make up new scientific laws that would make it logical. Other than that, you can basically do whatever you want. And that's basically it. So let's move on to the next one, which is variety. Variety is probably the most basic metric you can find, well, after geography of course. But when you try to evaluate some world on how great its world building is, you're probably gonna think of variety first. And evaluating it is pretty simple. The more locations, languages, cultures you have, the better. But again, as long as you implement them right, because just saying or showing that you have 1,000 countries in your world doesn't really help, because all of those countries that you showed have to be part of the story. But as long as you can manage this, you should be good. Anyway, let's go on to the next one, which is connections. Now this one goes a bit deeper, and by connections I mean, for example, connections from one character to the other, from different parts of the story, or connections from one location to the other. Basically, when a minimal amount of things is forgotten and the longer the story goes on, the more everything ties together. But connections shouldn't be limited to the things in real time. It can also mean connections from the present to the past. Because this world that you have, it still existed like 20, 40, 100 or 1,000 years ago. And if you connect those past events to the present and show how they formed this world, you will undeniably get a better world building and a deeper story. But there is a different type of connection that deserves an entirely different criteria, because in my opinion it is that important. And that is politics and the balance of power. Now what I mean by this is how different countries, communities or factions in the world interact with each other, how some events slowly reshape the world, and how the fall of one powerful group may give birth to the other. For me, this one is really important because this is how real life is. One major change in one country will impact all the others. Some incidents affect the world less and some affect it more, but this connection is essential if you want to make your world feel alive. But going back to different types of connections, when I was talking about connections to the past, I failed to mention the history itself and its importance. So yeah, the next category is lore. The history of the world itself. And it is not only extremely important, it is also probably my favorite thing about world building. And if we get back to One Piece for just a second, lore is probably the main reason I fell in love with it. I feel like having a totally different set of stories happening in the past, because this is what the lore is, it deepens the world so much. It ceases about being what is happening right now, and it's more about what has happened throughout the history and what is this world all about. It actually comes to life and you can see how much those countries changed in, for example, 100 years, where they started. Some countries were really undeveloped and now they're prospering, and the prosperous countries completely collapsed. You feel like you're in a history lesson, but the subject is not our world, but another one that is completely made up. And that is why I believe that connection of the past and present is so important. But there is another type of connection that I didn't mention, and this is the most important connection out of all of them. I actually don't really hear anyone talking about it when they mention world building, and I'm talking about character-world correlation. So in writing, there is a concept describing this, and it basically goes, the character and plot are inseparable. And you can't just write a story and then write a character later, because that's just not how it works. And the reason for it is pretty straightforward. It's because your character has to move through the story according to who he is and what his values are, what his goals are, and so on and so forth. Which, if you think about it, makes total sense. And from it comes another thing that not many people think about, and that is that the character has to fit the world too, not just the story. Meaning, according to this character's goals, motivation, personality, this world has to be an extension of him. This world has to be an absolute best playground for him. Without this, the world and the story in general, they just fall apart. And yes, that would be all when it comes to my criteria. So we can switch to the second section of this video about why One Piece fits all of those criteria better than probably anything that you have seen in your entire life. So let's go again from top to bottom and start from geography in One Piece. I think that to those who have already seen the map of One Piece world, the geography doesn't need any introduction, but I still want to go over it since it's just that amazing. The world itself is separated into 4 quarters, and it is separated by 2 things. The first being Red Line, the long circular piece of land that goes all around the earth and is close to impossible to climb. And the other one is Grand Line, which is an unpredictable stretch of ocean that goes on around the world, but the other way. It gets crazier and crazier the further you travel through it, and it probably also has like the craziest weather system that I've ever seen. And it only gets worse when you get to the second half of it. And on top of that, you have entire nations that live in the sky or underwater. And this whole insanity also functions really well. You have calm belts, for example, that explain why Grand Line is so separated from the rest of the ocean. And it doesn't make any sense according to our science, but for the One Piece world, it makes total sense. But when it comes to this series, it's only an aspect of the bigger picture when it comes to variety in One Piece. I don't think that this one needs any introduction too, because everyone knows how long One Piece is, but just being long isn't enough. You have to utilize that length, and yeah, One Piece comes in clutch there too. I have not seen a series with a better variety of locations, races, and so on and so forth. They're not just exists, but they're baked into the story, they're a part of it. The amount of nations, islands, and small factions here is off the charts too. And you don't have just islands on the surface, you have islands underwater, and in the sky too. And One Piece planet is definitely big enough to fit all of that. Definitely bigger than our Earth, for example. And it also utilizes that variety to its fullest potential, using every island, tribe, or nation to its fullest capacity, and not just telling the viewer or the reader that it exists. We all know those memes about characters getting introduced in episode 4 and then appearing later in episode 400 or 500 or 800, and it's just so true. And Buggy is a clear example of that. He was literally introduced in episode 4, and then he appeared next in, what, episode 420 or something? In Impel Down. And he did appear before that, but he had no significant role whatsoever. So to sum it up, One Piece is the king of variety, because it not only introduces a lot of the stuff, but it keeps it there and utilizes it throughout the story. But I think that we should move on to some other, more interesting criteria, and the first one being connections in One Piece. This one is pretty obvious. Connections that One Piece has in it sometimes literally keep me up at night. And it is the connections between all. The people, the countries, the factions, and the pirate groups, everything is connected. And that thing with Oda introducing a character in like chapter 20 only for him to appear in chapter 800 later and still play a crucial role. Literally no one is forgotten. Now, the reintroduction of different characters does cause different opinions inside the fandom from time to time, and it's not just the fandom, me too, honestly. Because not all those characters are beloved, and some of them better stay forgotten. For example, I'm talking about you, Moria. It really might get a bit boring when you're following them. But for me, even if it's sometimes true, I'm all for it. Because without this, you can't deepen the world that connect it even further. And for me personally, I better have better world building. And also connections to the past, you can't forget about that either. Some might even say that One Piece is is all about its past, and honestly, it's kinda true. The world of One Piece didn't just happen to exist, it is a result of something that happened 20, 30, 40, 80, 100, or 800 years ago, or even more. I'd love to go even deeper on that, but you'll have to wait for the lore section. But we can't talk about other types of connections, like connections between different countries, without talking about politics and balance of power in One Piece. Now, for me, this one is obvious too. With all the factions and all the countries that One Piece has, it still never fails to move those pieces along with the story. Every major shift in power brought changes to the world. When Whitebeard died, it brought a ton of chaos. Countless islands were overrun by different pirate groups, even though there was still someone to take his place and it was easier to avoid the global conflict. And it was always the case for the series. Every shift of power shifted the world ever slightly to remind you that it was indeed alive. But even though I like this trait so much, I feel like it's not the best that One Piece has to offer. Because the next trait is a much better contender for this title, because I'm talking about lore in One Piece. Well, One Piece is notorious for its lore, and for me it's definitely its best quality. We have multiple events in the past that are of insane importance, from the main ones that would be everything that happened to Loki in Elbaf 14 years ago. Don't worry, I won't spoil you if you're an anime only. Then the God Valley incident 40 years ago and all the history of rocks. Again, don't worry, I won't spoil you. Then when Emmeth climbed the Red Line 200 years ago, even though we don't know anything about that, I bet it was major. And in the end of the day, we still have the Void Century and the war that took place in it. There are many more things that make up the history of One Piece, but the craziest thing out of all of this is, and you'll probably agree with me, when we compare all the things that we know and all the things that we don't know, we understand that we know almost nothing about the history of One Piece, which is absurd. Yes, the manga in the latest year or so has managed to shine the light on the recent history, like God Valley incident for example, but things like deep history, Void Century and all that other stuff, we can only guess. And considering that we still know so much, this is truly magnificent, because we understand how much more we will get in the future. And here we are, touching on the last criteria, which is for most people really hard to notice. And as you probably guessed, it is character-world correlation in One Piece. As I said before, this correlation is really important because your world has to be made for your main character, and vice versa. And again, One Piece has almost no contest here. Luffy is the perfect main character for this world, and you can clearly see it in several aspects. First is his desire to go and explore. He wants to see the world, he wants to see it all. And I think that this is one of the best worlds for that in fiction in general. There are so many levels, so many things to learn, it's definitely enough for Luffy to be happy until his very last sail. Damn, I started talking about Luffy's last sail. Not gonna lie, it made me quite sad. Anyway, let's move on. The second reason why One Piece world is perfect for Luffy is because he's all about freedom, but One Piece world on the other hand, it's all about taking it from people. There is slavery, genocide, racism and many more awful things in that world, and for Luffy it is a perfect opportunity to fulfill his desires, to fight for freedom and to help people. Even though he doesn't consider himself a hero, I believe that he definitely is, he's just not a standard variation of it. And the One Piece world, in a state that it is right now, is definitely in a need for one. So, One Piece has many aspects that make its world building truly elite, but as I said before, we really haven't seen anything yet. Almost all of the past is still shrouded in mystery, and once everything is revealed, I believe that it's gonna shake not only the One Piece world, but our world as well. Yeah, subscribe for more anime content and see ya!